First, let me just talk quickly about how we're going to run today. Pastor Mullen and I decided that to talk about this subject, we'd like to focus on where there might be conflicts between scientific faith and religious faith.
Really hard to understand.
And okay, all right. So we also want to get you participating. So we're both going to talk for a little bit, and then we want to get you having little discussions to see what questions you'd like to bring up or talk about more. So we're going to try to follow roughly this schedule. And I'm going to be talking about science. And I've given several seminars here on scientific topics that were focused on providing you with scientific information. My focus today is quite a bit different. I want to focus on where there may be conflicts between what we learn from science and what we have learned from theology. So the focus of my science talk will really be on how science is influencing our view of God. And we'll start talking about what science actually is. It is just an ongoing investigation into our human condition. And starting off back in biblical times, and actually up until about 1400 AD, the only things that we could use to understand our environment were our 5 natural senses. You know, hearing, vision, touching, etc. And starting in about 1400 AD, we had the Age of Enlightenment, and we started using technology based on science that led us understanding much more about our environment. And one of the things I'd like to point out here is all of our understanding of the universe now has been developed through using our human logic. And many of us are very proud of our human logic. But if you step back, and you might realize that there probably logic exists way beyond human capability. And that's one of the things we're searching to understand. Okay? So, most of us have taken scientific classes, and we've been taught there are scientific laws. And they're often taught as those are definite laws, and you have to follow those. Well, when we think about it, I believe a better way of looking at the scientific laws, like the law of gravity, it's a statement of our best human understanding of that topic at that point in time. And I'll be talking about a couple of examples where our view of the universe has changed very dramatically as we've understood technology more. Okay, so quickly, why have people done this science stuff? And why would we be concerned if there's a conflict between scientific learning and religious belief? Well, first of all, these are reasons why people, quote, do science or study science or teach science. And the basic idea is we pursue things that are going to make our lives easier, more enjoyable, and in particular, to live longer. So, basic things, we learned how to cook food, and food is much better cooked. We understood technologies that let us build steam engines, or our gasoline engines that run our cars, which obviously makes it much easier to do work, to plow fields, etc., rather than using horses. Another example would be, well, we figured out how to actually destroy mass. And of course, you probably have heard of the scientific law that says the conservation of mass is an absolute, you can't make or destroy mass. Turns out that's not really true. Nuclear reactors actually destroy mass, and that's how they produce energy. And one of the reasons we're more and more interested in nuclear power is it seems to be the only way to generate electrical power without hurting our environment and our atmosphere by the release of CO2. Okay. Talking about extending lives, well, all of medicine is based on science and application of science to various things. So we certainly have a very strong interest in extending our lives. Okay. So overall, the reason we do science is so that we can interact with our environment in a more productive and efficient manner. And, again, going back to the medical part, science has let us extend the average lifetime from something like 30 years, which back in biblical times it was, to now more than 60 or 70 years. And it keeps increasing in most civilizations, most cultures. Okay, so I'm talking about science, and many of you might think, well, okay, he's going to talk about this high-level physics and that sort of thing. What I'd really like to bring out here is how much science impacts our lives. And usually it's in ways that we don't even think about. So what I've shown here are the branches of science. And I apologize for it not being very easy to read this, but you'll see there are things like biology, botany, etc. We do have quantum mechanics and things like that. That's just one area of physics. But looking at our environment here, and then what I've shown over here are the various technologies, basically, that have evolved from our understanding of science. So I'd advise you, as you look through these, to think about the things you do every day. Well, all of us eat every day, and of course the way we eat and the way we prepare foods is based on science. And it's not, pardon me, classical, quote, highfalutin science, but it is basic science. Our understanding of medicine and pharmacology is also based on scientific findings. So the point I'd like to make here is nearly everything we do every day in all of our lives is largely based on science and the technology that has been developed based on science. So many people who are deeply religious might say, well, I don't believe this science stuff. It's nonsense. Don't pay attention to it. Well, everything they do in their lives really depends on it, and they're just not aware of that. Pardon me. Okay, so that's that point. Now I'd like to focus on how does science impact our view and our ideas of God or other divine power. And to make this point, first I'd like to refresh you that very early in history, people always were trying to figure out what our universe is. And they would describe it, and they would describe God in relation to that worldview or understanding. And as time has gone on, we've had an evolution of our understanding of cosmology, and it actually has a strong parallel to our understanding of basic science and physics, etc. So it turns out that our natural senses was what we were using prior to about 1400. After 1400, we started understanding science much better, And we could observe our world and our universe way beyond what our natural senses let us understand. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So, my point in bringing this up today is that our human understanding of a deity or divine being is definitely impacted by our worldview. And our worldview is every one of us has an unconscious view of what our world and our environment is like. And way back in time, that was a very, very limited view. Now we have much different and broader view. Okay, so going into that example, these are actually illustrations that I think Pastor Mullen provided to me of the early view of our universe. And earliest ones are from about 400 BC. And one of the surprising things is those views were still held by most everybody who thought about our world until about 1400 AD. Long time. And basically, the universe consisted of our Earth, of course, and there was this firmament or this heaven above us, and we had the sun and moon that orbited the Earth, of course. And this is just another illustration of another culture's view of the world at that time. This model had several characteristics. One, it was based on all we could observe, which was just using our natural senses. People would look up and they'd see stars and the moon and the sun, etc., and they'd just do it with their naked eyes. Correct. Okay. Another thing was everybody agreed the Earth is obviously the center of the universe, of course. And all these heavenly bodies orbit around the Earth. So another characteristic was the universe is finite, got a definite size, and it doesn't change. It's just an unchanging, static universe. Okay, so those observations were based on using our natural vision. And the point I'd like to make here is what we have learned once we go beyond our natural vision. And so I've got a chart up here of electromagnetic spectra. And electromagnetic means it's an interaction of electricity and magnetic fields. And we humans see just a small part of this spectrum. This is actually waves that have frequencies. And our human vision is limited to this little tiny portion right here. That's all human eyes can see or detect. And we cannot detect these lower level frequencies or lower frequencies, and we can't detect these higher frequencies. But once we started learning about technology and developed the technology to make detectors that would, for example, be able to measure infrared light at a slightly lower frequency than we can see, we learned a great deal. And I'll give you an example in just a minute. And this listing here just noted what we learned as we learned how to make detectors that would be sensitive to these lower frequencies, like radio waves, X-rays, gamma rays, are higher frequencies. And again, my point here is our human ability to understand our environment just exploded, if you would, once we used out those technologies. Okay, so this is an example looking into space and looking at, and this particular thing is this pillars of creation. And this view right here is the best view that we could make using the natural or the visible spectrum. And it's from the Hubble telescope, and you can see a bit of fine structure here. And again, that's based on using the frequencies that our eyes respond to. Once we could use lower frequency detectors, we could look beyond the dust and the cloudy things here, and using infrared light, this is the picture that came from the James Webb Space Telescope. So hopefully you can see that by understanding all these different features, we could learn much more about our universe than looking at the natural vision portion. Okay? So again, my point is our whole view of the universe changed once we were able to use these technologies. Okay? So we can just look at astronomy through time. Again, prior to Galileo building the first good telescope back in 1609, all the observations were just with a naked eye, and of course they were constrained to that small portion of the spectrum that exists in the universe. So, using good telescopes by 1800, astronomers mapped out our solar system, and they actually could map out our Milky Way galaxy. And this is the galaxy that we exist in. On a clear night, you can look up and you can see parts of the Milky Way. Okay? Turns out by 1930, astronomers had found that there are other galaxies. And in fact, our whole universe is not constant or static. It is expanding all the time. And it's actually expanding at an increasing rate as time goes on. Okay. So largely that was due to our using technologies based on science. And now we're at a point where we humans have observed things that went on at what we believe was near the beginning of our whole universe. That's more than 13 billion light years ago. So we have looked into the past 13 billion years. And many people think, well, that's silly. You can't look into the past. How can you see things that happened in the past? Well, we're actually all doing that right now. You look at the sunlight. Well, it turns out all of that light started at the sun, which is 93 million miles from us. Well, the light traveled down at the speed of light, but it actually took like 8 minutes to go from the sun to the earth. So when we see the sunlight now, we're seeing what happened on the sun 8 minutes ago. So we're looking into the past. Well, things like the James Webb Space Telescope look into the past further, and they actually look into it, and they would look back at 13 billion light years. Now, light year, of course, is how far light travels in a year's time. And light is going at 186,000 miles per second. So very fast, but if you took 13 billion years, light would travel a great distance. And we've been able to actually make observations now, and scientists are discussing what those means. So baseline here is now most scientists believe that our galaxies are many and our whole universe is composed of it. So just a quick view of it. It used to be that, again, before, say, 1800, most people thought that the whole universe was just the Earth. And then we learned about our solar system, and now I've really got to apologize for this. I blew it up. This is an actual picture of things that we have observed. using astronomy and technology. And it's showing there are billions of galaxies. Each galaxy consists of billions of stars. So what does this have to do with our view of God? Well, used to be not too long ago, we thought that God created the earth and people and was in charge of what goes on. So that would have been God's job back then. Well, as we started to understand our solar system, we found, well, God must have also created all those planets and somehow put them together so they stayed together in our solar system. So God had a much larger job then, and our way it impacts our view of God is largely subconscious. People seldom thought, well, that meant that God was doing much more than we used to think he did, or she did. And people wouldn't be consciously aware of that difference, but our whole view of a divine being would shift. Then when we learned that there's this gigantic universe, now we're faced with a situation where do we believe that there's this divine being who created all of these billions of galaxies and is running them today? And this same being would actually respond to our prayers and be concerned about our lives? That's a very, very different being than when we thought this was what the universe was made of. So you can probably easily see how some people with strong religious faith would think all of this stuff is just counter to what I believe. And the Roman Catholic Church, for many, many years, as Pastor indicated, did not believe that this stuff was consistent with their theology. And unfortunately, they did burn many people at the stake because of that. Okay. Well, so from that view of science, now we just draw a couple of conclusions. One is that our scientific views are based on our observations. And they're not static. There's not a static law of gravity that most of us were taught. There's a law of gravity and that's it. Well, guys like Einstein came along and found that our vision was very, very limited when we developed the law of gravity. Now, as we understand more, we understand the universe is different. So, just an example, Einstein came up with the theories of relativity and predicted many strange things happen. Do any of you believe those strange things really happen? Yeah. Do you actually utilize that in your daily lives?
Not more knowledge.
No, you don't do that stuff. Yeah.
You do. The satellites that you use to communicate long distances have to adjust for dilation of time because they're moving so fast relative to us. The clocks on, say, the GPS satellites move a few, nanoseconds slower, but those nanoseconds add up over years and years and years, and suddenly your GPS satellite thinks it's in a different place than it is, and thus your car thinks it's in a different place than it is.
So you're exactly right. That was going to be the example I would give. But what it means is if you use your cell phone or your smartphone here to find the location of anything, it's using those GPS satellites. And it would not be accurate unless the relativistic effect of the dilation of time were used in mapping things out. So we all actually are using relativity every day when we find the location of things. And most of us don't realize that. Okay, so the other thing is, the conclusions that we've drawn, again, they're based on the human condition at the time we make those opinions, and also human logic. And maybe there's a logic that is way beyond our human logic. Okay. Next point is scientific observations are definitely meant to be objective. And that's a key point. Well, that means they don't include any consideration of human emotions. Things like love play no part in those scientific observations. Some people think that love is really an important consideration, but they're not included in scientific analyses. So that leaves us with the situation of, do scientific observations conflict with faith, or there are different views? Some people might say, well, I believe that God is really all-knowing, and He's always known these evolutions that would occur in our understanding of the universe, and in discovering or evolving our understanding of technologies. And He has arranged that as we understand these technologies, it goes along in a parallel path with our understanding of our universe. And so maybe those are just two different perspectives on exactly the same thing. And there are many, many eminent scientists who believe that's the case. Okay? And there's actually an increasing view of things along that line. Okay, so from that background, I've talked quite enough, and let me turn it over to Pastor Mullen, and we'll have a different point of view, possibly.
I highly recommend it. It's a delightful read, and it helps people square away some of their thinking and attitudes. And the guy is a Christian, so we got two things going in this book: Christian faith and high-level scientific thinking. So, it's interesting, since we were talking about religion and religion in the past to some extent, that this book was written in 2015, was published by Fortress Press. You know what Fortress Press is? A Lutheran publishing house. Okay. And did you, the subtitle includes this: Finding God in the Evolving Universe. I was thinking about the image that we had up there of the universe that never changed, never moved, nothing. It was just set in place. His take is what science has brought to us. Evolution is a reality on many, many levels, including, as it turns out, Christian thought, Christian theology. Changes with the changes of the world, because there are new insights, new perspectives that are brought forward. So we're not just stuck back with Martin Luther pounding something on the door of a church, though we agree with a lot of what he has to say here as Lutherans. I think what Paul Wallace, who wrote this book, is right in line with the thinking that Sterling and I have discussed and want to present here today. So I can't resist telling this story. This is at the very beginning of his book, so I'm going to read it carefully and dramatically. This is a story that happened, this is a real story. It happened in one of his astronomy classes about a decade ago, I believe. So he says this: one of the finest things about teaching is being present for exact moments of understanding. I don't know if you've encountered that with your kids, your students. Yeah, when somebody gets it, wow. So he says, you can't always, but I can. I can't be there when these happen all the time. And you can't always know what's going on when it does happen. But the lights turn on, they can be hard to hide, especially when they're of the high voltage variety, so to speak. So this most memorable moment for this kind of happening was about 10 years ago. It was the first day of this introductory astronomy class. Such courses always begin, or often begin, with the obvious view. The night sky is seen as points of light that we call stars, and the modest fact that most people think about is we can see about how many stars in the night sky?
You can see about 4,000
That's right. Even less than 4,000. 3,000 stars, he says. And if we were able to remove our home planet from under our feet, we'd see about another 3,000 stars, assuming the lights are dim, the atmosphere is clear, and our eyes are good. We could all total, if you stood up on the earth with your feet for 24 hours, you'd see 6,000 stars. That doesn't seem right because most of us know just what you said. There are billions of galaxies and billions and billions and billions of stars. So in general, most students, he says, are mildly surprised that the number is so small. They expect the millions of stars at the very least. So he says, we chatted about it briefly in the classroom, and then I glanced down at my notes and was prepared to move on to the next topic, which is what profs do. And the next topic was going to be constellations. When he looked up, he was surprised to see an expression of mere trauma go across the face of one of his students. He says, I'll never forget it. He was sitting on the left 2 rows in the back, scarcely breathing. I was so surprised that I paused and asked him if he was okay. Was it something I said? I didn't think about that right away. His look of horror then turned into a sheepish grin, and he explained himself. I gotta get this. Boy said, it's just that you said there are stars under my feet. And I had never really thought of it like that before. Wow. Think about that for a bit. Stars under our feet. Then, to everyone's delight, the student laughed out loud. He was about 20 years old and a very good student, really. Was he really learning this for the first time? Could he have possibly missed something so obvious? It's a good question. In fact, it was about us. Have you ever thought about that before? That there are stars beneath us. So what Paul Wallace thought is that he suspected that something more interesting happened that day than just seeing a concept. The spherical Earth that we live on is surrounded by, on all sides, by stars. Every direction you look, there's going to be stars. But until that day in the classroom, this knowledge had been a mere concept. You know, it's something you learn in school, and put the book aside, you got that down, the stars everywhere, you rah, 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 rah. But the look on his face was something else. This knowledge was a mere concept for him up to that moment, like a dry husk encasing a bud of green actuality. At the moment in the question, the husk fell away and reality was recovered. The stricken look on his face suggested to me, Wallace says, that the stars far beneath his seat became tangible to him in that moment. It became reality, real, not just something you learn in school. Real, this is really the case. Perhaps he felt faint with vertigo, which may be why he was looking so awful. He certainly felt something, Wallace says. In that short space of time, the absolute, that you were talking about, became relative. And the strangeness of the world was revealed in all its simplicity. Take that. I hope you can see this. It's sort of hard. There's a human figure standing here, and then there's a stars behind the tree. It's over. So, there are many, many different kinds of things that happen. There are many things to learn, and there are also many experiences that can happen to us. And included in that realm is religion and the presence of the Holy One that we call God, or whatever other names that you want to use. Now I'm going to tell a personal story about me. This won't be about Paul Wallace, this will be about Dave Mullen, a kid from Bloomer, Wisconsin. Back in 1967 and 68, I was assigned from my seminary, Lutheran Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, to take a clinical internship at UC Medical Center and up on Parnassus Heights in San Francisco. So I left home, driving all across the western United States in my Ford Fairlane 500 red hot rod, and listening over and over and over on the radios to all kinds of hippie music I hadn't heard before. And one of them was, when you come to San Francisco, wear some flowers in your hair. And I felt at a loss because I didn't have much hair. How would I fit in with that culture? Well, after some months in that clinical internship, which included visiting many young adults up on the upper floor who had terrible diseases, many of them had cancer and other things that really put their lives right at the edge of living. After some months of that, visiting mostly these young adults, I was going down into a dark valley. I really was. I wasn't ready for what I was seeing and witnessing. I was supposed to reach out and try to help these people, and I did my best. But I talked with my supervisor, and I lost my sense of self and of my soul. My soul seemed dark to me. Yea, though I walked through the valley of the shadow of death, that's what I think it was like. It's a kind of spiritual experience. I think I had the imposter syndrome rolling around in my head. I really didn't know what the heck I was doing, but I had to act like I did. And I was exhausted. And so I was a lost and deeply troubled young man out there in San Francisco at the UC Medical Center. So I told my internship supervisor about this, telling him I was feeling lost and deeply troubled by all this human suffering. And he was silent for a bit and looked at me, and you could see the look on my face, and he said, "Dave, why do you hate yourself?" Why do you hate yourself, Dave? It pierced my soul. Stunned silence came over me. And then what happened? An experience that I would call a mystical experience of my whole area here, my body was just opened up, filled with light, brilliant, glowing, wonderful light. And in that light was total love, acceptance, passion. For me, this was, who do you think this was? It was God. No other explanation for me. I wasn't taking LSD or anything like that. This was God. I can still see it so clearly. Yeah. It's changed my life. That's one of the reasons why I'm here talking to you now. Because my life had changed. Well, not totally, but it changed in terms of the basic attitude and outlook. And I still love science, and I love religion. And what I love more than anything else is that God, I know, is real. I don't have one doubt about it. That experience was so powerful. That then, in instant darkness, banishment, and that glowing, glowing light. See that one? Oops. Yeah. Sort of like that, only the light would be much bigger in terms of the screen. And then what happened is I overflowed with joy. I couldn't hardly stop talking about it. I finally did because I knew I was annoying people. Then I had to go back to seminary for the last year, and my mind was just alive. And I started reading all the books I could find on other religions, on mysticism, on theology. I had to write a final paper that just flowed out of me like, it was just total energy there. It's a wonderful thing. And what I discovered as I was doing research at the seminary was there are a variety of religions, and almost all of them talk about some kind of experience like what I had. That's when I really started digging into all this stuff. Pondering my experience, which was a gift, and stunning as hard to explain as it is. So I came to understand more and more the profundity of theology, Christian theology. And what's there is that God is responsible for all this, in a sense, because God is present. Just as the universe is a visible creation, so God is a experiential presence. And oh, how wonderful they happen. Over the years, with conversations with a variety of different people, I've found out there's a lot of people that have experiences like that. Well, why not? And some people in churches, for example, tell me if I preach anything close to this kind of topic, I'll always get phone calls from a number of people that want to come and talk with me about what their experience was. They don't like to talk about it with their family or friends or neighbors because they're worried they'll think they're nuts or crazy. No, people tell me this. That's what they're afraid of. But I always tell them, to have a spiritual experience like what you're telling me about is a blessing. You know it. Else you wouldn't be talking to me about this. Yeah. And for many, science, the awe and wonder is akin to the young man's experience and the realization of his presence in the universe, the stars underneath him, around him, everywhere, when he finally realized the reality of that. So this is all related to theology, to science. Scientists themselves can be excited by the math. There are physicists talk about beautiful computations and formulas that are just beautiful. I look at it and say, oh, I don't even know if I can talk about science. So what I'm saying now, let's put another one here. You know what that is? Andromeda Galaxy. The light is kind of faint here. But that's our sister galaxy, basically. About 2.5 billion years, light years. Yeah, well, 2.5 million light years away. So, all this stuff that's happened, that we're talking about, is far removed from the traditional concept of God that was in the little graph you had, where you have the sky up above, and then God is up there at the very top of everything, and then everything just kind of settles down until you get to Earth. That's not what this is about. We don't have, my understanding of God is not that God is completely perfect or unchanging or unaffected by anything that happens. God makes many things happen. But the universe is changing. And religion with it is changing. What we have and worship is what I like to call the Holy One, who lives in the magnificence of creation. That theology forsakes any clear theological statement about the scriptures that's rendered absolute. You have to believe this or you're going straight to hell. That's not part of my outlook on faith. In the scriptures, you'll find portraits of a God who gets angry, God who cries for people, who begs people, who shows up for people, who suffers for them and with them, Isaiah 53. And finally, in the emergence of the one we call Jesus the Christ, who becomes the compassionate presence of God in us and in the church and in the world. And change happens many times. So the above comments I've made have relate to Iliad, Gilead, Chardin. Here we go, science and faith. He was a Jesuit priest. His training was to be a paleontologist and a geologist. He excelled in all those, but he also had a mind filled with divine input of God. And he began to write. And he wrote a number of things, and the church was so happy with him, they refused to have him publish anything. He was bad news to the Roman Catholic Church, not to blame the Catholic Church all the time, but back in his early work, the church was absolutely against him in terms of, you can't speak this stuff in public, you can't share this with any publishing house, just keep it to yourself and or some friends. So, though Chardin is no longer alive, his once-a-time controversial theology is growing as a sign of the reality of the universe and of the Creator. What did he write about? He wrote about God's involvement in an evolutionary process, and Christ was a sign of the great changes that were going to come, and he was the leader of it all, and one day it'll all be a conscious entity, a superconscious entity. So that was viewed as it's much finer in detail than I just presented, but that's the overall thing. That God is involved in the ecology, the changing of the universe. The evolution of the cosmos and of God in our human understanding. That's what he was working on. His longing and his life's passion was that people discover the seeds of a new cosmology that accepts science and religion put together. When those come together, we may find ourselves with joy and awe and deep gratitude. I wish I could just talk all of you individually here. It would be fun to do that. So, well, the last thing I'm going to say at this point is this. This is another story. Different, but at the same time, I see it in the presence of God. In the summer of 1994, a Christian therapist and author by the name of Gerald May joined a small pilgrimage to Bosnia, which had just been devastated by war. You perhaps remember that. Horrible thing. he had the opportunity to speak with poor people who had lost everything, homes, possessions, entire families. And as they told their stories through tears of grief, he sensed deep hope in them. Through interpreters, he asked if it was true. Yes, hope, they replied. He asked if it was for peace. No, they said, things have gone too far for that. Well, then he asked if they had hope that the United Nations or the United States would intervene in some positive way. No, it's too late for that, they said. He asked them, then what is it you are hoping for? They were silent. Nobody said anything. Silent. They couldn't think of a thing to hope for, and yet there was undeniable hope shining in them. So he asked one last question. How can you hope when there's nothing to hope for? The answer? God. Now I've got a little song for you here called Everything is Holy. Okay. By a Minnesota songwriter.
When I was a boy each week, Sunday we would go to church, pay attention to the priest, and he would read the holy word, consecrate the holy bread, and everyone would kneel and bow, and take the only difference is, everything is holy now, everything is holy now. When I was in Sunday school, we would learn about the time Moses split the sea in two. Jesus made the water wine, and I remember feeling sad. Miracles don't happen still. Now I can't keep track, 'cause everything's a miracle. Everything's a miracle. Wine from water is not so small, but an even better magic trick. Anything is here at all. So challenging thing becomes not to look for miracles, but finding where there isn't one. When holy water was rare at best, where they wet my fingertips, but now I have to hold my breath. Swimming in a sea of it. It used to be a world half there, heaven second rate hand me down, but I'm walking with the reverend there, 'cause everything is holy now. morning outside I stood, I saw a little red-winged bird shining like a burning bush and singing like a scripture verse. It made me want to bow my head. I remember when church let out, how things have changed since then. Everything is holy now. It used to be a world half there, heaven's second-rate hand-me-down. But I walk it with a reverent pair, 'cause everything is holy now.
Delightful song.
Okay, well, this is the time when we thought it would be a good idea to take a short break, maybe a 10-minute break, and have you gather maybe in small groups and figure out what additional topics would you like to discuss. What questions do you have? Do you think there is a conflict between science and faith? Do you think they really are the same things? Whatever. So let's reconvene at, let's say, 11:15, and on the back table we have some pieces of paper where you can write down what questions you have, or where you'd like to disagree with me or ask Pastor Mullen something, and we'll get those and look at them and spend the rest of our time that way. That's going to be, I think, one of the most valuable parts of getting together like this. Okay? So see you about 11:15. Okay, well, let me just start. Can we get anybody to bring up a question or a topic they would like us to discuss? Martin? Did you have your hand up? Okay. Yeah, sure.
I had a question regarding the universe, and you said it's continually growing. I just wonder what you mean by that.
Okay. What I mean is astronomers who look at the universe and look at the various galaxies, first they can measure how far they are from the Earth here. And then they can actually measure if they're moving away from us or towards us, etc. And all of those observations show that the galaxies are all moving away from each other, which was the first surprise. The second was that they're actually doing that at an accelerated rate. So clearly, that raises questions. Well, gee, what's going to happen? Will it always keep expanding? Or will it somehow run out of energy and start coming back together? And there are theories about either of those things happening, and there's a clear answer. We don't know. We just don't know. And that's one of the things humankind may figure out. Yeah. Any other comments on that question?
I was just going to say, I just wanted to comment on what you said, that there was a whole,
Can you put it right up to your mouth, please?
Okay, there was a whole program yesterday on Science Friday on PBS about dark energy and dark matter.
Yes.
And you might, it fits right in what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think they'll probably rebroadcast that, so it's on a podcast, I don't know, but that's worth listening to. It was very interesting.
Thank you, yeah.
This one's for Pastor Mullen, in fact, it's in writing up there, and that is, when you had the mystical experience that turned you around from deep depression probably to joy, how did it affect your ministering to the dying young people?
It did. Yeah, it's Actually, for a while, I was on a floor at UC San Francisco, where it was almost all younger people. And it was really hard. But the compassion was present with me to deal with a lot of different kinds of hard subjects. One of the worst I had to deal with was a dying young man, must have been around 28, 29 years old. I can't remember what his illness was, but he was laying in bed. The nursing people said, you need to go over and visit that man there. So I did. He couldn't even hardly talk. Sweat was pouring off his body. I just sat there and held his hand. Probably 15, 20 minutes. Prayed for him, and then I left. I came back 2 days later, and he thanked me for saving his life.
Wow.
What a simple thing.
Wow. A quick here, up way up here.
Well, I had a question about the center of the galaxy. If we're not the center of the galaxy, then some objects would be moving towards us. Isn't that true? Or where is the center of the galaxy?
That's very interesting. Obviously, long ago people thought, well, obviously we're the center of the galaxy. Then we started finding out, well, there's a Milky Way and there's lots of stars in it. And some interesting diagram. And we've actually, astronomers have seen many, many of those stars, and they've made maps of them. And the Earth is actually on there's a spiral galaxy, and on one of those legs, sort of towards the outside, there's a little pinpoint that is the Earth. So we're far from the center. Something that physicists and astronomers and cosmologists have discovered is, you may have heard of the theory of black holes. Black holes would be a location in space where mass is gathered with high enough density that it creates very, very strong gravity, and anything that comes within what's called the event horizon gets pulled into it and never ever can get out, including light. And that's why it's called a black hole. Light goes in, never comes out. Sounds like science fiction. Well, we've found that black holes definitely do exist, and we've found that the center of essentially all galaxies is a gigantic black hole, certainly including our own Milky Way. There's a great big black hole in the center of our galaxy.
Yeah, I guess I think I used the wrong term. What I was looking for was the center of the universe.
That's a harder question. Nobody actually has any idea. And what we do observe is that it appears that all these galaxies are all moving away from each other. And space is actually expanding. And the idea of an edge of it or a center doesn't appear to actually be something that exists. Now maybe at some point we may learn more, but right now nobody has an answer to that. Yeah.
I can answer that. It's easy. I am the center of the
Yeah. Oh, yes, yeah.
with the billions of galaxies and God's awesome creation, I think it would be egotistical of us to think that God didn't create beings someplace else within all these billions of galaxies. How does that fit into science and faith?
Okay, and of course, many people that's occurred to them, and people have done probabilistic calculations. That would be, they'd say, well, to have life similar to what we know, a planet has to be within a certain temperature range, etc. And it's called the Fermi problem. They would calculate what's the probability that there is some form of life in all these planets, all these galaxies and planets. And you can do that probabilistic calculation and you don't really get a strong answer one way or another. As thinking develops now, it seems that more cosmologists are having the same idea that it appears that there must be a probability that there is other intelligent life. But again, at this point, it's a subjective view, and there's no observable evidence of that. NASA, of course, has a very active program to look for extraterrestrial life. And they've got a bunch of very good scientists looking for any indication, and nobody's found anything yet.
Over here.
Go.
Wait. I wanted to hear from Pastor Mullen on that as well.
I don't know what to say about that. My inner self would want to say, sure, there's got to be life elsewhere. We can't possibly be the only life in an entire immensity that we have. That's just the way I think about it. Absolutely no proof about it whatsoever. But I can believe it if I want to.
I don't have a better answer. But, I mean, that's the question I'm asking myself. What happened if actually some alien life form came to visit us, right? And how would that change our faith? How would that change the biblical story going to alien life form?
The simple answer for that. It wouldn't do anything other than kill us all. Why else would the aliens come here?
Well, I visit my neighbors without killing them every time, right? And the thing is, like, our faith, or the Bible, tells about the story that we, on this planet, have with God. It doesn't tell the story of other life forms, of other planets, or whatsoever. So I don't think that it would actually be a problem for us. It would just be a different story.
Amen.
There's a pretty consistent problem I find in my discussion with quite a lot of people, and that is the age of the universe versus science and scripture. How often these numbers are completely different. In a lot of interpretations of the Bible, it's thought that the age of the earth and thus the universe is about 8,000 years old, and science shows us that the age of the earth is about 3 billion, and the age of the universe is about 13.8 billion.
Yes, of course. Very, very good question and topic that many people wonder about. And I've got a couple of points of view on that. One is, if you were a scripture writer back at the time of Christ, and you somehow had divine knowledge of what the universe was, how big it was, how old it was, how would you try to describe that to people back in, say, 0 AD? what language could you use? I mean, if you talk about billions, well, back in those days, people might have had an idea of what 100 was or 1,000. The concept of a billion wouldn't mean anything to them. So how could you write the scriptures in a way that wouldn't just sound like gibberish? So that's one point of view. Another is one of the strange things that have come from the observations of the James Webb Space Telescope is prior to that, most scientists agreed that the age of the universe appeared to be about 13 billion years ago, 13.77 something or other. James Webb Space Telescope is looking back to see things that actually occurred in that time frame. And now many cosmologists are saying, whoops, these things don't make sense. Maybe the universe is really 27 billion years ago, or something different. And the theories of dark energy and dark matter, again, many cosmologists and physicists had felt that, yeah, there definitely has to be something like dark energy and dark matter so that our interpretation of gravity and how it impacted the growth and the evolution of the universe was right. When the idea of dark energy and dark matter were made up of, well, we must have something like that to have the motions of the galaxies that we observe. Well, now they're observing things and some are saying, well, maybe we really don't need dark energy or dark matter. So, again, it's an open debate. Yeah.
Okay, this is in response to other beings out there in the universe. Didn't Jesus say, in my Father's house, there are many dwelling places?
I believe, yeah,
Okay. And then also, if you read Ezekiel, and Ezekiel saw this thing, a wheel and a wheel, and it looked certainly looked a lot like a UFO to me. And I'm thinking, there's probably UFOs out there looking down at us and going, we ain't going down there.
Too many kooks.
Too many kooks.
Nukes. We have too many nukes. Wouldn't be good for that.
And God laughs.
Amen. Amen. just an observation from a theologian to Scripture, because our daughter, when we were in Germany, she came over to the US, and for a one-year exchange. One day she's calling me, crying, saying, Papa, am I a good believer or not? Because I just talked to someone in my family who said, well, don't believe that the universe was created 8,000 years ago, then you're not a believer at all. You see, if you look at the stories of the Bible, like it's not a science book, it's a faith book. Not a faith book, right? Just to make that clear. There's two stories of creation, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Are they the same story of creation? No. One is more like we know how that's developed with human beings, right? As you said, December 31st, 11:59 some p.m., we came into the picture. That fits the first story of creation. The second story of creation starts with God creating humankind. And then animals, mankind, and creating all the animals to find a companion for that poor man, finally creating Eve out of a rib. I still have all my ribs. I don't know how my wife was created. Two different stories. They don't match. The people were not dumb when they put the Bible together and added those two stories. They knew they didn't match. So they didn't care that it didn't match because it was not a science book. It was not something, you better believe this or else, burn. It was hey, God is great. God created the whole thing. Amen, hallelujah. If you look at the first story of creation, this is like the song we heard earlier. There's a verse, and then there's a chorus. God looked at it, and everything was good. The first day. Second day, same thing. God creates, God looks at it, it was good. And so it continues. This is like a song of praise. It's like a poem written to say, hey, we believe that there is something behind all of what we know and what we see. And it's awesome and it's great. But it was never meant to be saying, okay, now count the years back to whatever. So there is, from my side, we don't even have to reconcile that, because it was never meant to be a scientific explanation how God actually created the universe. Sorry for jumping in again.
He's handing off questions to me now. The age of the universe and how it interacts with Scripture. I think we just discussed that, didn't we? Yeah. So I think that's probably covered. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? No. So, which came first, God or science? Obviously, it would be God. Yeah. Well, I think so. If we're following the idea that God is the creator, if God wasn't there, there would be no creation. So creation comes.
So God created evolution?
Yeah. 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 There's different theologies around you could read about this. One really complicated one is Whitehead's book. What's it called? Can't remember. An elaborate book about God and creation and everything. And well, Teilhard would also be, Chardin would also be in this category of working on things. And this relates to, and thank you, Pastor, for the clarification about the Bible. It's really, what's required to read the Bible is, well, if we want to be believers, is to have faith that the real thing is the Bible is a story, multiple stories, told by people mouth to mouth for a long time, and then written down, and they are stories about faith, not about science, just what your pastor was saying. To try to make the Bible be science is a big mistake, because it was never, ever meant to be that. So that's where I would end up with that. What else do I have here?
A question here?
Well, kind of a comment. Many, many years ago, when our 40-something was growing up, we were doing the creation story at her Sunday school. And I was using materials, this was at a Catholic church prepared by nuns, and they handled it very well. What it was, as I recall, was they did, that every culture had creation stories. But the Jewish Bible was the only one that had God creating everything. And all the other cultures, it was an evolution of the gods and the people together, whereas God was pre-existing in the Jewish Bible.
Yes, in fact, you could say that creation stories, especially the first one, excuse me, the creation stories are I lost my train of thought. Huh.
Just follow
Oh, yeah, they were written, in a sense, they were passed down. They're, in a positive way now, they were myths. And what they were designed to do was emphasize God created everything. When your pastor was going through the list of things that God created on such and such days, all those things was done to claim that this was the divine person, the divine being that created these things. And so it was a strong affirmation of faith and trust in the creation because God did it all.
I've got a question here that is a historical question. It says, is it true that the Catholic Church actually knew that the Earth orbits the Sun in Galileo's time, but had to deny it because the regular people couldn't handle it? Well, looking at history, I mean, first of all, the Roman Catholic Church didn't exist just one idea or one theology. There's a hierarchy, the Pope at the top, of course, and the Pope could make his pronunciations. But the church included thousands or maybe 1 million people, and there was certainly a variety of opinions about everything. And there's, some evidence that, Galileo is the best known. Copernicus and other astronomers suspected that the sun was the center and other planets were revolving around that. And, it was really Galileo that probably brought it to a head as a political, religious topic. And so we'd have to look back in history to see what pronunciations the Pope had made at that time. But you can be sure there were many different opinions within the members of the Catholic Church at that time.
I agree, yeah.
Okay.
Question here.
Okay. This is kind of a contemporary question, but as we approach, as you approach the speed of light, time slows down. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So our astronauts that are going out there, they're going pretty fast. And if they go fast enough, probably a lot faster than they're going now, but that's the question. When they come back, they would be coming back to the future. Right?
No. Actually, it's a basic discussion in relativity, and the predictions of relativity would be, yes, if a person traveled fast enough, the clocks that they would have would actually run more slowly than a clock on Earth. So they could go back, go out, and what we say would be years and years, and come back. They would actually be younger than somebody who had stayed on the Earth at the same length of time. And that's what relativity.
Do we see that at all with astronauts or not?
They
are their
actually
clocks
don't go
different?
fast enough.
Thank you. On that about people traveling fast, it's the astronauts. It seems like they are going pretty fast, and they really are, but it's nothing compared to the speed of light. Right? This light can go around the Earth 7 times in 1 second. So the speed that astronauts travel at is such a tiny fraction of that the relativistic effect of it is inconsequential. Anyway, well, my question too, like a follow-up on that one about the Catholic Church and what they said publicly versus what they knew privately, is what about other cultures, astronomers in other cultures like Arab astronomers or Chinese astronomers, did they know? When did they realize or figure out that the Earth and other planets revolve around the sun versus the other way around? I think they inherited some of the knowledge of the classics, right? That when the Roman Empire disintegrated and they had the great library at Alexandria that had all the classical knowledge and so forth, and I think some of the Arab people down there inherited some of that, and they kept learning alive like through the Dark Ages. Did they know about these astronomical truths?
Good question, yeah. I don't really have much information on that.
I don't either, sorry.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was true. Yeah.
Good question.
Connie?
The answer is, yeah, someone knew before Galileo. There was an Arab man, I can never remember his name, that did understand before Galileo. In fact, Galileo used his work pretty consistently, that it was not the Earth that the sun revolved around, but the other way around.
That approximately, so when does this go back to then?
I believe Galileo was around 1400, yes?
16.
16?
15 to 16.
15 to 16. The Arab man had made his research paper in approximately 600 AD. But he was not listened to and was, in fact, murdered by his church.
Yeah.
He was stoned to death.
What's the story about the fellow that, like in Egypt, that saw about how sunlight went straight down?
That was a Greek man.
Okay.
He saw that sunlight went straight down in certain locations, went to another area, and did the same experiment and found at the same time that it was a different angle. That was a Greek experiment. Pythagoras was someone who repeated that experiment. I don't remember the name of the guy who did it first. And that was how we realized the Earth was round.
So
That was actually Eratosthenes.
Yes, that was his
And he did it to actually measure the size of the Earth. He already knew the Earth was a sphere, and he measured the size of the Earth, and he was within about 10% of what we now know is the average radius of the Earth. But it brings up an interesting
that experiment, right?
question about science and history. Turns out there were basically accepted views of different things at different times, but there are also a number of examples of people coming up with different views that were not accepted. Back, in Greek times, Aristotle was the best known philosopher or scientist, and he came up with theories of how things move and that sort of thing. And he had the idea that everything was made up of a combination of earth, air, water, and fire. And again, until like 1400s, most people agreed with that. Turns out there were some other scientists, not nearly as well known, and some of them had actually figured out what we now call the atomic theory, that said everything is made up of little tiny atoms. And they did a thought process and they documented it. People thought they were crazy and ignored it. And there are a whole slew of things like that in the scientific world.
Before that, we had a theory called gaseous theory, in which everything was divisible. You could take something and split it in half, and then take that thing and continue splitting it in half forever. And then we had atomic theory and realized, wait a minute, there is actually a smallest thing. We call those quarks. Quarks.
I think this is just an observation. It's interesting you talk about the history of the Catholic Church and how they had quashed information through the ages for political reasons and to retain power and whatnot. But it's interesting that in 1927, I believe there was a Belgian priest who was an astrophysicist who was considered the father of the Big Bang Theory. He was the one who originally submitted that idea to the scientific community, which I guess was generally accepted. And so, it's just interesting to see how eyes are open through the ages, and you get to a point where you can't deny the obvious. But as I was thinking about the Big Bang, I was thinking about this priest who obviously had one toe in each pool, you know, the theological and the scientific. And was he trying to figure out, well, how old is the universe? But does the universe continually change? Did it really have a beginning or an end? So these are the kind of ideas that make me dizzy.
My question is, the topic of this seminar is faith and science, and is there a point in trying to say which was first, or which is better, or which, trying to prove faith through science, that kind of thing? And I'm sort of getting a sense from one of the people here about the chicken and egg question, like, really? God created everything and science came after, that kind of thing. And in listening to Pastor Mullen and his experience, in my own experience, I think faith is something that, it's just something that is a gift, personally, and you have it and you can nurture it, and you can read things, you can go to church, you can have it, nurtured by your community and so forth, but I don't think you can make people have that sense of mystery and wonder about the world. It just, you have to just kind of seek it and want it. But it doesn't mean that it's man-made or human-made or person-made. In my opinion, it's a gift. It's a divine gift.
I don't recall much about it, but at some point, John Paul II wrote an encyclical, I think it was, about faith and science. And I believe his conclusion was, in summary, science asks what and how, faith asks why. Now, I don't know if you've read do you have anything to add to what he said, because it was a really long one, but that's what I remember about it.
No, I haven't read it recently. I do have something I'd like to comment on, though. It relates to this topic a lot. Saint, my mic is on, isn't it? Yeah. Come on, not talking loud enough again? Okay. The great theologian for the Catholic Church is Thomas Aquinas. I bet you lots of you have heard about him. He's was a brilliant thinker. His Summa, which he never got quite finished, is a magnificent piece of writing. But one day what happened to him during a worship service was he had this religious experience, profound, so profound that he went to his friend and said, "I'm never writing another thing." What he witnessed was so transcendent over his writing, he said, "I'm done. I'm not writing anymore." So, that's thought for reflection too, huh?
Just let me comment on what Elizabeth was saying. Faith, and if you interpret that broadly, is seeking to understand, where we are, who we are, etc. And largely that's called curiosity, which is a common human trait. And very well-known scientist Albert Einstein wrote a number of things saying curiosity is the most important thing. He was being actually complimented on his accomplishments now, and he basically said, well, I'm a good mathematician and all that, but what's really important and what makes me outstanding is curiosity, and that is the most important thing. So I think that goes along with what you were saying. You know. And, you know, the idea of where did that come from? Well, if we believe that God created humans, He created humans, some with more curiosity and some with less.
So I just wanted to bring up a tiny little story. I have twin 7-year-old grandsons, and the last time we were with them, they're the smartest 7-year-olds in the world. But I brought up something about God, and one of the 7-year-olds said, "I don't believe in God, I believe in science." That came from his father, not from his mother. But pray for me as he grows up that I can show him in some way that there is not a difference between science and faith. But just that thought process is out there.
I have another short story I could tell. One that just happened. I got so excited. So Sue and I were home by ourselves. Our youngest son and his family lived with us. They were all out doing something, and the doorbell, it must have been 8:30 or so at night. The doorbell rings, it's all dark. I go to the peephole and look out. I can't make out any figure, and it just went away. So I opened the door to look and see what's happening. And here comes our family friend, young man, about 19, 20 years old, Dino. And he's standing out there. He says, "You know, I've really been thinking a lot about God lately. What's the thing about God anyway?" And I said to him, "God." And I said, "Come on in, let's talk." So that was a wonderful time he stayed at our house for an hour and a half or so. Sue and I had a conversation about God and religion with this young man who is really searching. He's Greek Orthodox, and he's going to masses and has friends. And so I said, "Get those friends together. You guys can have wonderful conversations about anything, you know, especially about religion." So these opportunities just pop up in our lives, and you'll have that with those young boys. Yeah.
This is just a comment, but I really appreciate Sterling's introductory discussion on the tiny fraction of our world that we understand. I think that to me is absolutely the crystal, the pure crystal here. In my profession, I'm a physician, and lucky enough that I was originally went through the osteopathic school where we don't have the restrictions on what we can do and say. And I did have the gift of practicing with surgeons as my mentors who would actually lay their hands on a patient and pray before the first cut. And it was a beautiful experience, and whether or not people in the room were religious or not, it really mattered not. It was beautifully accepted by everyone. And now there's, I think, a lot of resistance to the discussion or belief that it's okay to be religious when you're a scientist. But I think it all goes back to that tiny amount that we know that we think sums it all up. We clearly don't. I mean, we absolutely don't. And I look forward to a time when we can expand that again for people in the sciences, that it's not something to hide or be ashamed of.
You look at my watch here, it looks like it goes slightly after 12. So unless somebody has something they really, really want to say or discuss, I'll just adjourn this seminar, and we'll do it roughly on time. Thank you all for your interest and your participation. I think that's what makes it really, really valuable to all of us. Okay, so again, thank you.
I'll give this to you.